Hillary by default.
That was Marlene Gerber, the organizer of this group. The white 60-somethings in the suburbs and the mostly black and brown 18-year-olds in the city are bringing up the same issues, but they've come to the opposite political conclusion. The high school seniors don't trust Hillary Clinton, in large part because she's taken campaign money and speaking fees from big Wall Street banks. One student tells me Clinton's only for herself. Anybody else? Can anybody else think of anything affirmative that Hillary Clinton has done for anybody else, ever? Anything positive? Not one thing. As for the older voters, they also have concerns about Hillary Clinton and campaign finance. In fact, the women in the Transition to Retirement group on the Upper East Side debate this point when Eileen Coburn objects to Emily Boland, suggesting Hillary Clinton isn't clean.
She takes money, speaking engagement monies, and I'm not saying it's not legal. I'm not saying it's not legal. What I'm saying is that every time you take money from a business,
Unless you take it from so many places that you couldn't possibly be indebted to everybody the way she has.
Nevertheless, the 60-somethings are sticking with Hillary. Across a 50-year generation gap, there's little difference in what these voters see as today's most pressing issues. But there is a difference in their conclusion about who best could address their concerns as president. The New York primary is April 19th. For WNYC, I'm Andrea Bernstein.
Showers with isolated thunderstorms this morning, areas of fog as well. Highs expected in the mid-60s today. Tonight, mostly clear, lows around 40 degrees. And the outlook for the weekend, tomorrow, Saturday, sunny. Highs will be in the mid-50s. Easter Sunday, partly sunny with highs in the upper 50s. Right now in Central Park, it's 53 degrees at 8:41.
WNYC is supported by Dear Evan Hansen, a new American musical from Stephen Levinson, Benj Pasek, and Justin Paul, choreographer Denny Mefford, and the director of Rent and Next to Normal, Michael Greif. Limited engagement begins tomorrow at Second Stage Theater. Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, offering cancer treatments such as immunotherapy and GPS-guided surgery, and working to find new ways to customize cancer care for their patients. Memorial Sloan Kettering, more science, less fear.
From NPR News in Washington, I'm Dave Mattingly. The parliament in Belgium is meeting today to look at stepped-up anti-terrorism measures after this week's deadly bombings in Brussels claimed by ISIS. They left 31 people dead, including 2 Americans. More than 300 others were wounded. Terry Schultz in Brussels says 2 of Belgium's government ministers have offered to resign, but the prime minister says no.
The Belgian Interior and Justice ministers will be grilled by lawmakers, and there's one big question in particular. When Turkey deported airport bomber Ibrahim Bakrawi to the Netherlands last year, why was he allowed to disappear? Though early explanations were that there was no information linking him at that point to terrorist activities, Bakrawi was on parole for other crimes. Leaving Belgium was already a violation. Being picked up at the Turkish-Syrian border should have raised serious questions.
Secretary of State John Kerry is in Brussels today. Japanese electronics giant Sharp reportedly is under more financial pressure as it negotiates a takeover by a firm in Taiwan. John Matthews reports from Tokyo.
Local media quote industry sources as saying Sharp's estimate of $88 million in the black may turn red for the fiscal year, citing poor sales in China's smartphone market. Osaka-based Sharp's now stalled talks with Taiwanese firm Foxconn are being watched intently in Japan, where domestic firms are often fiercely protected from foreign ownership.
I'm Dave Mattingly, NPR News in Washington.
I'm Richard Hake on WNYC in New York. Stay with us in a few minutes for the Marketplace Morning Report. That'll be followed at 9 o'clock by the BBC NewsHour on 93.9 FM.
The transformation of East New York in the 1960s wasn't simply an issue of racial discord.
Primarily, the white families blamed the blacks who moved into the neighborhood for the abandonment and the decay of the neighborhood, when it was really the real estate manipulation going on behind the scenes.
There Goes the Neighborhood is a new series from WNYC and The Nation about gentrification in Brooklyn. Tune in Tuesdays during Morning Edition and All Things Considered, or listen at wnyc.org/neighborhood.
Attorney General Loretta Lynch says one of the 7 Iranian hackers indicted by her office illegally accessed the system controlling the Bowman Dam in Rye Brook, New York. The dam is about 20 miles north of the city.
Our view is that fugitives don't remain that way forever. We have a long history of reaching out and working with countries where individuals may land and extraditing them. And we also have a long history in keeping charges alive and, in fact, bringing people to the U.S. for justice.
The 2013 intrusion would have allowed the hackers to control water levels and flow rates at the dam, but the dam's gate was manually disconnected at the time. Showers, isolated thunderstorms this morning with areas of fog, highs expected in the mid-60s. It'll be clear tonight, lows around 40 degrees, and then tomorrow, Saturday, sunny, highs in the mid-50s, and Sunday, partly sunny with highs in the upper 50s. Currently in Central Park, 53 degrees.
This is Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Renee Montaigne.
And I'm David Green. We all know how peer pressure works. Maybe you're sitting next to a student in class and some of his or her diligence is rubbing off on you. When you learn your neighbors are installing solar panels on their roof, maybe you want to try doing the same thing. But we're also increasingly learning that peer pressure does not always work. And here to talk about that is NPR social science correspondent Shankar Vedantam. Hey, Shankar.
Hi, David.
You were dressing very well today. I feel like I might try to dress better tomorrow. It feels like peer pressure does work, doesn't it?
I hope it rubs off on you, David.
So what's going on here?
So here's the thing. Our peers often shape our behavior, but sometimes they don't. And what I'm about to tell you actually I think is based on an intuitive idea. So, David, let me give you a scenario. Let's say that you're training for a 5K race and you learn that a producer on Morning Edition was a good runner. It might be a good idea to start working out together. But what if your partner was not a little better than you, but an Olympic distance runner? What would happen to you?
I would be really intimidated and not want to run with that person.
Exactly. I was speaking with Todd Rogers. He's a professor of public policy at Harvard's Kennedy School. He's just finished a study looking at the difference between being with peers who are a little better than you and being with peers who are way better than you.
Interesting.
Here he is.
When you are compared to people who are doing a little better than you, it can be really motivating. Other people use less energy than me, I'm more likely to reduce my energy use. Other people are voting, I'm motivated to vote. But what's happening here is it's really not that someone is doing a little better than you. It's someone is unattainably better than you.
I am so curious to know how he actually experimented with people to figure this out.
Well, it wasn't with running. He studied more than 5,000 students taking a MOOC, a massive open online course. Now, like many MOOCs, David, this one had students grade one another's work. So the idea is that you and I are both students. I grade your work, you grade my work. We both learn things from one another and by seeing each other's work. Now, just by random, ordinary students sometimes get paired with the very best students, the top students. And all that Rogers and his colleague Avi Feller did was analyze what happens to students who are exposed to this top quality work. And what they find is ordinary students become far more likely to quit the course when they are paired with the very, very best students compared to similar students who are not reviewing the work of the top students, but reviewing other students who are closer to their own ability.
So you and I might be paired together. I'm grading your work, you're grading mine. You are a top-notch student, and I'm noticing that because I'm grading your work and I'm getting very intimidated and I might be likely to quit the course then.
That's exactly right. And the reason this happens, David, is because of a very interesting psychological phenomenon known as a reference bias. When the ordinary students are reading the work of the best students, they're unconsciously drawing a faulty conclusion. Here's Rogers again.
You interpret that as meaning everyone who's participating in this course is that good. The problem is that people don't realize these are atypical. This kind of process is called reference bias. They shift who they think the reference group is, and they think that this is what their peers are like.
Oh, so I see. So the problem, Shankar, is that someone sees someone who's doing great things and they worry that everyone is that great, which makes them feel inferior. Is there a way to avoid people having that perception?
Yeah, I think one thing that educators and parents and managers might want to do is to help, students and kids and employees see that the individuals they're comparing themselves against are not the norm. In other words, it's fine to recognize work that's extraordinary, but you shouldn't assume that everyone other than you is performing at that extraordinary level.
Got it. You're an extraordinary dresser. I'm not even going to try to match you tomorrow. I'm just not going to come to work. That's the bottom line.
This is the first time in my life anyone has said I am unattainably better than them when it comes to dressing.
Oh, savor it, Shankar. That is Shankar Vedantam. He's NPR's social science correspondent, and he's the host of a new podcast that explores the unseen patterns in human behavior. It is called Hidden Brain. And this is Morning Edition from NPR News. Our theme music is written by BJ Liederman and arranged by Jim Pugh. I'm David Green at Youth Radio in Oakland, California.
And I'm Renee Fontaine at NPR West in Culver City.
I'm Richard Hake on WNYC in New York. Stay with us for the Marketplace Morning Report. That's coming up next. That'll be followed at 9 this morning by the BBC NewsHour on 93.9 FM. The BBC will have much more on the aftermath of the attacks in Brussels, where police have arrested 6 people as they hunt for suspects, and 2 Turkish journalists are on trial for spying. But critics of the government say it's really an attack on freedom of speech. That's the BBC coming up at 9 o'clock on 93.9 FM. On AM 820, The Takeaway will trace the history of the company that built the Hoover Dam to its involvement in rebuilding Iraq decades later. The company has been working hand in hand with the U.S. government for nearly 100 years. That's coming up on The Takeaway at 9 on AM 820. Showers, isolated thunderstorms are possible with areas of fog this morning. Highs will be in the mid-60s. Tonight, mostly clear, lows around 40 degrees. And tomorrow, Saturday, sunny, highs in the mid-50s. Easter Sunday should be partly sunny with highs in the upper 50s. Right now, 53 degrees in New York City.
Support for NPR comes from member stations and from American Jewish World Service, working for 30 years to end poverty and advance human rights worldwide. Learn more at ajws.org. And the Wallace Foundation, a source of ideas for improving education and enrichment for children, both in and out of school. More information is available at wallacefoundation.org.
Might the federal government lend new help not to just insolvent Puerto Rico, but to those who invested in it?
Marketplace Morning Report is supported by Constant Contact, a proud Marketplace sponsor for 8 years, committed to helping small businesses succeed with email marketing. Learn more at ConstantContact.com. And by Epson. With high-precision industrial robots installed in factories worldwide, Epson's robots are designed to help businesses improve product quality. Where there's business, there's Epson.
From Marketplace in New York, I'm David Brancaccio. Details are emerging about a plan in the U.S. Congress to help resolve Puerto Rico's debt mess. House Republicans are putting together a bill that would create a powerful oversight board for Puerto Rico. Marketplace's Nancy Marshall-Genzer has details.
Published reports say the oversight board would be able to subpoena documents from the Puerto Rican and U.S. governments. The reports say the board would be able to audit Puerto Rico's government, looking for savings, and would eventually decide how much of Puerto Rico's debt should be restructured. The Treasury Department says all of the island's $72 billion worth of debt should be eligible for restructuring. Puerto Rico's creditors are watching the process closely. But the chairman of the House Committee on Natural Resources, which is in charge of the process, said Puerto Rico's government, quote, lacks the capacity to effect change over its finances. And Puerto Rico still hasn't handed over audited financial statements the committee wants. The only way to get them, the chair says, is through a strong control board. Some Democrats want Puerto Rico to have more of a say in the process. Congress passed a law in 1984 that says Puerto Rico can't declare bankruptcy under a U.S. law that allows states to put struggling cities into bankruptcy.
Nancy, thank you. Most financial markets are closed around the world today. The Dow goes into the Easter weekend down 1.1% for the year so far. The S&P 500 is down 1.2% year to date. NASDAQ down 2.1% since New Year's. The Shanghai Stock Exchange did trade today, gaining 0.5%. The U.S. government measures the economy by calculating gross domestic product, roughly adding up all the money transactions. First, a preliminary calculation, then a revision, and then today, a final. Just now, the government revised growth upward slightly to an annual rate of 1.4% October to December. That still adds up to unspectacular. Marketplace's Mitchell Hartman has more.
There were a bunch of things dragging us down late last year, says Steve Murphy at Capital Economics. Weirdly wet weather, plunging oil prices, China, Europe, Brazil, all flailing around.
Yes, GDP slowed in the final quarter of last year, but there's nothing that points to that being a sustained downturn or anything too concerning.
What was concerning was the stock market fall and wild gyrations in January and February, but that's mostly behind us.
Right now, if you look at fundamentals in the United States, we're seeing decent growth somewhere around 2.5%.
Joe Brusuelas at consulting firm RSM ticks off those fundamentals.
Very strong job growth, decent recovery in housing, and of course auto sales, and even consumer retail sales in luxury, entertainment, and accommodation.
2.5% growth would have seemed mediocre back in the 90s, but after the shock of the Great Recession, that may be as good as it gets. I'm Mitchell Hartman for Marketplace.
There is a report today that Playboy Enterprises is looking for a buyer. The Wall Street Journal calculates the sale could generate $500 million. Playboy used to be a public company, but the last trading for that stock was in 2011. Playboy magazine just overhauled itself to take better advantage of online digital and dropped the naked. The objectification of women is probably still there.
Marketplace Morning Report is supported by Kronos, with cloud-based workforce management solutions designed for organizations to maximize their most valued asset, their workforce. Kronos.com. Kronos, workforce innovation that works. And by the Candida Fund, working to advance individual dignity and sustainable communities through investments in transformative leaders and ideas. CandidaFund.org.
Business of entertainment now on the day the movie Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice comes out, and a moment of truth for Warner Brothers today. Marketplace's Adrian Hill joins us from Los Angeles. Hey, Adrian.
Hey, David.
So what are the stakes for the studio, Warner's?
Well, it's got to feel like the fate of the planet really rests on the success of this film. Warner Brothers had a rough year at the box office last year, and its hopes really have been riding on Batman vs. Superman. The studio spent something like $250 million on the movie itself, reportedly another $150 million or more on marketing. So it's a lot even by Hollywood standards, but more than that, they're hoping this is going to launch the whole DC comic movie universe franchise to rival some of the success that Disney has had with Marvel.
You know, funny though, I was just thinking what the world really needs right now is more superhero movies.
Right? I mean, they're where the money is right now, so you got to milk it. Deadpool had made more than $700 million. The most recent Avengers brought in nearly $1.5 billion, and Warner Brothers wants in on that. So there's a whole slate of DC films they have planned. Wonder Woman, The Flash, 2 Justice League films. They're working on plans for a movie about Aquaman. All told, something like 10 movies over the next 5 years, sort of riding on the success here, or hopeful success, if you're Warner, of Batman v Superman.
And not to spoil the party here, but do the reviews I've been reading make any difference at all? They've not been good, but I guess they spent $150 million on marketing, so who cares?
Right, well, you gotta be nervous, I think, if you're Warner Brothers. What I have read so far about that is everyone expects opening weekend will be big. The question is whether or not this movie can have the sort of tale that Avengers has had, that Star Wars had before that. If people are disappointed, they're not going to tell their friends. It's not going to be the kind of thing that goes and goes and goes. So we'll see.
Now, Adrian, I understand before we go that one of the earliest meetings on record of Batman and Superman happened on the radio?
It did. By some accounts, the very first time they hung out was back in 1945 on a radio show called The Adventures of Superman. And I dug up the first couple parts of a show called The Mystery of the Waxman. So here Superman rescues a nearly drowned Robin, who tells him, dum dum dum, Batman has disappeared.
Incredulously, Superman stares down at the white-faced boy. Batman, the most powerful and spectacular human in all the world, save for Superman himself, has disappeared. What can this mean?
It means, of course, a thrilling adventure. But I've been unable to find the entire episode, so maybe our listeners can help dig up the rest of it for me. But in that episode, as best as I can tell, this is going to be Batman and Superman working together, not fighting.
And not having emo moments of self-doubt either. Marketplace's Adrian Hill, thank you very much.
Thanks, David.
The U.S. stock and bond markets are closed today as we get into this Easter weekend, as I say. Our senior producer is Nicole Childer. Stephanie Hughes produces Marketplace Tech. I'm David Brancaccio with the Marketplace Morning Report. From APM, American Public Media.
WNYC support comes from YouGov, a research company dedicated to helping brands and their agencies understand what consumers think. Learn more at yougov.com/research.
Stay with WNYC. Coming up next on 93.9 FM, it's the BBC NewsHour, and on ANA 20, you can hear The Takeaway. Currently 61 degrees. We do have cloudy skies right now in New York City. We could see a shower, maybe an isolated thunderstorm, especially this morning. Highs today will be in the mid-60s. There'll be areas of fog as well. Mostly clear tonight, lows around 40 degrees. And the outlook for tomorrow, Saturday, sunny. Highs will be in the mid-50s. Easter Sunday should be partly sunny with highs in the upper 50s. Once again, right now in Central Park, 61 degrees and cloudy.
This is WNYC, FM, HD, and AM, New York. Just keep listening.
Welcome to NewsHour from the BBC World Service. I'm Julian Marshall. Belgian police make 6 arrests as they search for those involved in the Brussels bombings, and French police claim to have stopped a plot in an advanced stage. In China, more than 20 are detained for calling for President Xi to resign.
If a society only listens to one voice, then mistakes are likely to happen. And a good way to prevent mistakes from happening is to let everyone speak up and to let us see the whole picture.
2 Turkish journalists go on trial on charges of spying.
It was a very important story that some trucks belonging to the Turkish intelligence service was illegally trafficking arms through Syria. So it was a war crime, in fact.
And the terrible scourge of breast ironing.
In my village where I come from, we use hot leaves to press the developing breast of a young girl so they can stop growing.
That's after the news.
Hello, this is David Austin with the BBC News. The US Secretary of State, John Kerry, has delivered a message of defiance to Islamic State militants. Mr. Kerry was speaking at a joint news conference with the Belgian Prime Minister in Brussels, which was hit by multiple bomb attacks last Tuesday.
We will not be intimidated. We will not be deterred. And we will come back with greater resolve, with greater strength, and we will not rest until we have eliminated your nihilistic beliefs and cowardice from the face of this earth.
Mr. Kerry says IS's fantasy of a caliphate was collapsing. Belgian police have arrested 6 people across Brussels as part of their massive manhunt after Tuesday's attacks. Meanwhile, a man arrested in Paris yesterday has been named as Reda Kriket. He was convicted in absentia in Belgium last year for being part of an Islamic State recruitment network. A British man who tweeted about confronting a Muslim woman in the street over the Brussels terror attacks has been charged with inciting racial hatred. The day after the bombings in Belgium, a post on Matthew Doyle's account said he challenged a Muslim woman. It read, "I asked her to explain Brussels. She said nothing to do with me," and mealy-mouthed reply. He was arrested the same day. A Turkish judge has ordered that the trial of 2 senior journalists accused of spying should be held behind closed doors. The men from the leading opposition daily Cumhuriyet published reports that the Turkish government tried to smuggle weapons to Islamist rebels in Syria. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan personally filed the complaint. From Istanbul, Daniel Birch.
Campaigners for press freedom say this is a politically motivated prosecution. The 2 men were held on pre-trial detention before being released in February after the Constitutional Court ruled their rights to personal liberty and security had been violated, as had their freedom of expression. On steps opposite the court before today's hearing, Can Dündar said they would defend journalism and the right of the public to be told the truth.
The Ukrainian lawyer for one of 2 captured Russian servicemen on trial in Kiev has been found dead. The Ukrainian Bar Association said Yuri Grapovsky had apparently been murdered. Reports say the suspected killers have been detained. David Stern reports from Kiev.
The trial of the 2 Russians in Kiev was stopped at the beginning of the month after Yuri Grabovsky went missing. Officials now say his body was found in a forest about 125 kilometers south of Kiev. Mr. Grabovsky, Ukrainian, was one of the defense lawyers for Alexander Alexandrov and Yevgeny Yerofeev. Ukrainian officials say Mr. Alexandrov and Mr. Yerofeev confessed to serving in the Russian special services after they were captured in May last year. Moscow says the men left active service to fight in Ukraine as volunteers.
World News from the BBC.
This is WNYC in New York. I'm Richard Hake. Two siblings who lived in Manhattan are confirmed to have died in Tuesday's terror attacks in Belgium. Former U.S. Ambassador to Denmark, James Kahn, says Sasha and Alexander Pinchowski were visiting Brussels. Kahn is the father of Alexander's fiancée. Officials in the Netherlands say the siblings were Dutch nationals but have both lived in the United States for some time. Two other Americans remain missing. The Port Authority will spend what officials say is a record amount of money on capital projects, including overhauls at LaGuardia and Newark airports. The agency approved the projects yesterday after an hours-long meeting in which board members fought about cost. John Degnan is the chairman of the Port Authority. He says the robust debate was healthy.
Openness and transparency, which have been urged on this Port Authority for years, and democracy are missing. But if they work properly, they get things done.
The agency allocated more than $5 billion for renovation work at the airports. More than 40 people were arrested outside the governor's office in Manhattan as part of a larger protest calling for increased funding for CUNY. Protesters say CUNY has been starved of resources since the recession, while tuition has increased for students. Steve Breyer teaches urban education at the Graduate Center.
We have less money to recruit working class students, and we've had to shrink the size of our entering classes. So we're contracting opportunity.
The governor proposed a cut in state funding to CUNY by $485 million, wanting instead to shift those costs to New York City. The governor's office now says CUNY will receive its full $1.6 billion in state aid. And the latest employment figures show a mixed picture for the area. New York City employers added more than 12,000 new positions, while New York State hired 25,000 employees. But in New Jersey, for the second straight month in a row, the news was not so good. In February, more than 8,000 people lost their jobs. Showers possible mainly this morning. Highs today will be in the mid-60s.
Hello and welcome to News Hour from the BBC World Service, coming to you live from London. I'm Julian Marshall. It's been a terrible week in Belgium with bombs in Brussels and multiple arrests. We'll get the latest on the search for the perpetrators, and we'll be reflecting on the motives of the bombers and the responsibilities of the media in reporting the attacks. And it's Good Friday. We'll be talking about attempts to fix the date of Easter and looking at Ireland's commemoration of what's known as the Easter Rising of 1916.
I think they were very brave men to do what they did. They wouldn't have had much money, they wouldn't have been well armed, and I just think the fact that they all marched to Dublin and some of them went to the various places around Dublin, I think that the bravest people I know. I don't know that we would have been as brave in our turn if we'd been asked to do it.
But the meaning of the rebellion is still deeply contentious in Ireland. We'll have a full report in about 20 minutes. But we go first to Belgium, where police have arrested 6 people as they search for suspects following Tuesday's attacks in Brussels, which killed more than 30 people. That search is ongoing, and within the past couple of minutes there have been reports of an explosion in a suburb of the city. The US Secretary of State John Kerry has also arrived in Brussels to offer assistance to Europe in the fight against terrorism, and in the past couple of hours he held a joint news conference with the Belgian Prime Minister Charles Michel. Mr. Kerry said defeating Islamic State would be a long struggle.
Our mission to defeat and destroy Daesh is not going to be accomplished overnight. It's going to take some time and patience and persistence. It will require resources and commitment and cooperation across many cultures and beliefs, and the recognition that this is in fact truly a global challenge.
And the Belgian Prime Minister Charles Michel spoke of the need for greater international cooperation.
We have had the opportunity this morning with John Kerry to discuss the fight against terrorism. How is it possible to do better? How is it possible to work together in order to be more efficient? It's also important to look at this issue on the European level. My country, Belgium, is trying to do our best efforts in order to play a positive role, in order to have a stronger Europe in the fight against terrorism, in the fight against radicalism.
The Belgian Prime Minister Charles Michel. Well, in a moment we'll join our correspondent Anna Holligan in Brussels, where, as I mentioned, there have been reports of an explosion in the course of a police operation and reports of a man neutralized, as is being said. But first to Paris, where a man arrested yesterday has been named by police. He was reportedly in the advanced stages of a plot to carry out an attack in France. The BBC's Hugh Schofield.
Grandmom's hip. The blister burst, and that became a bed sore. Without good blood flow, the wound didn't heal and grew bigger and deeper.
I couldn't get it to go away. When I say we were at our wits' end with it, we were beyond there. Okay, like what do we do? What do we do to fix this?
When skin and tissue inside the bed sore started to die off, Bobo says you couldn't ignore the smell from the open wound. Family members often have to figure out tough nursing tasks by themselves. John Shaw from the Caregiver Action Network says when an illness is unexpected or when a loved one suddenly needs around-the-clock care, people need to get new skills fast.
Then they get home and within that first 24 hours think, gosh, we can't handle this. We need some home health care.
Hiring help for just a few